We no longer want to be exporting ore, soil, and dusts and rocks from the minerals of our continent, but we want to be exporting finished products that have value.
For decades, Africa has been trapped in a vicious cycle, exporting raw materials for pennies, importing finished products at inflated prices, and staying dependent on foreign economies. But Burkina Faso just broke the cycle. In 2025, Captain Ibrahim Traoré inaugurated the Moulin Double Star M2S flour factory, a bold step toward economic self-sufficiency and industrialization. This isn't just about making flour, it's about reclaiming control over the nation's food supply, creating jobs, and rejecting economic exploitation. For too long, Burkina Faso imported nearly all of its 315,000 tons of annual wheat consumption from foreign suppliers, draining its economy and making it vulnerable to global price shocks. But in April 2024, Traoré made a historic move. He suspended flour imports, forcing the country to invest in local production. The message was clear: Burkina Faso will no longer be a passive consumer of foreign goods. It will be a producer and economic powerhouse in its own right. The $23.8 million investment in this flour mill is more than just an industrial project. It's a blueprint for African nations seeking true economic independence. If successful, it could inspire a wave of industrialization across the continent, proving that Africa does not need to be dependent on the West for food, fuel, or finance. But can Burkina Faso sustain this bold step, or will foreign forces try to undermine it? Here, we would like to take a moment and thank you for supporting us and being a valued part of our strong community. And if you are not yet a member, we encourage you to join us and help build an even stronger community together. Let's get started. Burkina Faso has entered a new phase of industrialization, and at the heart of this transformation is the Moulin Double Star M2S flour factory, a project that represents more than just economic progress. Built in Gampela, Saba, this facility stands as a symbol of the country's ability to chart its economic destiny. With an investment of 15 billion CFA francs or $23.8 million US dollars, this flour mill is not merely another industrial plant. It is a clear declaration that Burkina Faso is ready to process its resources rather than rely on external imports. The scale of this project is significant. Covering an expansive 5-hectare site, the factory was designed to accommodate the demands of a nation that has long depended on foreign wheat supplies. The structure itself is an R+5 building, a multi-story industrial complex that houses not only advanced flour processing equipment, but also storage facilities, administrative offices, and quality control laboratories. Every aspect of this facility has been designed to ensure that it functions as an independent and efficient producer of high-quality flour, reducing the country's need to import from foreign markets. At full capacity, the M2S factory is projected to produce between 220 and 300 tons of wheat flour per day, a staggering output that marks a decisive shift in the country's ability to meet its own needs. Alongside flour production, the plant will also generate 80 tons of bran daily, an essential byproduct that can be used in livestock feed, further strengthening Burkina Faso's agricultural sector. By establishing this factory, the government is not just investing in food production, but in a broader economic ecosystem where flour, bran, and other wheat-based products can fuel domestic industries. However, the impact of the M2S factory goes beyond production numbers. One of the most immediate and tangible benefits of this project is job creation. The factory will employ at least 300 full-time workers, offering stable incomes to families that previously relied on seasonal or informal labor. However, the real economic boost comes from the additional 10,000 seasonal jobs that will be generated by the supply chain surrounding this facility. Farmers, transporters, warehouse workers, and traders will all see opportunities arise from this single investment, as wheat must be transported, processed, packaged, and distributed across the country. This expansion of the job market aligns with a larger vision, an economy built on local labor and production rather than dependence on imports. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video, and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. To ensure smooth operations, the M2S factory has also implemented a modern supply chain and logistics system that will allow flour to reach bakeries, food manufacturers, and consumers efficiently. This logistical structure is essential for making sure that the flour produced in Gampela does not simply sit in storage, but actively replaces imported alternatives in daily use across the country. The factory is also equipped with cutting-edge milling technology, allowing for different grades of flour to be produced, each suited for specific needs, whether for bread, pastries, or other wheat-based goods. The establishment of this factory is not just an economic venture, but a strategic decision. Burkina Faso has long struggled with its dependency on imported goods, and food has been one of the most vulnerable sectors. While the country has a rich agricultural sector that produces staple crops like maize, sorghum, and millet, wheat has remained an exception, an import-heavy commodity that has made the country susceptible to price fluctuations, currency devaluation, and external trade policies. By setting up this factory, the government is taking its first major step toward removing a critical point of foreign dependency and reshaping the economic landscape. But a factory is only as strong as the policies that sustain it. In the past, similar industrial ventures in Africa have failed due to poor planning, lack of government support, or foreign economic sabotage. Recognizing these risks, the leadership behind M2S has ensured that the factory's operations are aligned with national economic goals, integrating it into broader industrial and agricultural strategies that guarantee long-term sustainability. Instead of simply launching the factory and hoping for success, the government has structured its food policies to actively support domestic production, creating a business environment where local flour producers can thrive. Moreover, the presence of M2S does not just benefit Burkina Faso alone. Neighboring West African nations are also potential buyers of Burkinabe-produced flour, meaning that this factory could become an export hub in the future, turning the country from a passive importer to a regional supplier. This level of ambition, where a single investment is positioned to create both domestic stability and external economic influence, is exactly the kind of forward-thinking strategy needed for long-term development. But the inauguration of the Moulin Double Star flour factory is more than an economic project. It is a political act, a rejection of the decades-old economic system that has kept African nations dependent on Western imports. For years, Burkina Faso has relied on foreign suppliers for wheat and flour, leaving its economy vulnerable to price fluctuations, trade restrictions, and geopolitical decisions that have nothing to do with the interests of its people. With this factory, the country is breaking away from a system designed to keep it dependent. The global food industry has always been an extension of political control. For African nations, wheat is a prime example of how foreign dependency is maintained. Burkina Faso, like many other nations on the continent, has imported vast amounts of wheat from Western countries, particularly from Europe and North America, despite having the potential to process its food. This was never a coincidence. It was a deliberate outcome of economic policies that ensured African nations remained consumers rather than producers. International institutions, trade agreements, and so-called development programs have pushed African governments toward reliance on imported goods rather than investing in local industries. The result has been a continuous cycle of economic vulnerability, where a single global crisis, be it a war, a financial crash, or a supply chain disruption, can send shockwaves through African economies, leading to food shortages and price hikes. By establishing its flour production, Burkina Faso is effectively declaring its independence from these external forces. No longer will the country be at the mercy of international wheat prices dictated by Western corporations. No longer will it have to adjust its economy based on the supply decisions of foreign agricultural giants. Instead, it is taking control of one of its most essential food industries. This is not just about self-sufficiency, it is about economic sovereignty. It is about refusing to let a foreign entity dictate whether Burkina Faso's people can afford bread. The decision to suspend flour imports in April 2024 was a bold move, one that sent a clear message. Burkina Faso will no longer finance foreign economies at the expense of its people. This move was not without its critics. Some economic analysts, particularly those aligned with Western institutions, warned that restricting imports could lead to short-term shortages and price hikes. However, these arguments ignore the reality that continued dependence on imports is not sustainable. In the long run, Burkina Faso must be able to produce its goods to control its economic destiny. The suspension of imports was not a knee-jerk reaction. It was part of a broader strategy to shift the nation's economic structure. Western governments and corporations are well aware of what this shift means. If one African nation successfully builds its industries and reduces reliance on imports, others will follow. And that is a problem for those who profit from Africa's dependency. The global food industry, much like the energy sector, thrives on maintaining unequal power dynamics. Western-controlled trade systems rely on Africa continuing to buy processed goods instead of producing its own. When a country like Burkina Faso decides to cut itself off from this system, it is not just making an economic decision, it is making a political statement. This is why attempts to undermine local production often follow when African nations take steps towards self-sufficiency. History has shown that when African leaders push for industrialization, they face intense economic pressure, sometimes even external sabotage. The wheat industry is no different. Western-backed trade agreements have long made it difficult for African nations to compete with imported products, flooding markets with subsidized goods that are cheaper than anything local producers can offer. The moment Burkina Faso tries to sell its flour, these forces will likely mobilize to push back. Whether through economic measures, media narratives that cast doubt on the quality of local production, or even direct political interference. But the timing of this factory's launch is key. The world is changing. Global supply chains are no longer as stable as they once were. Countries that once relied on Western imports are rethinking their economic models, turning inward, and strengthening their local industries. Burkina Faso is positioning itself ahead of the curve, making a strategic move that will allow it to stand on its own feet while others continue to struggle with reliance on unstable foreign markets. Beyond the immediate impact on Burkina Faso, this move sends a message across Africa. If a country with limited resources like Burkina Faso can take this step, what is stopping wealthier nations from doing the same? The truth is nothing but economic policy choices. If other African governments follow suit, prioritizing local production over foreign dependency, they too can reclaim control over their industries. The M2S factory is not just about Burkina Faso's flour supply. It is a model for how African nations can regain control over their economies. In the past, leaders who attempted such bold moves were met with resistance. Thomas Sankara, for example, tried to make Burkina Faso self-sufficient in food production in the 1980s, only to be met with external opposition. But today, the global landscape is shifting, and nations that choose to industrialize and break free from dependency have more opportunities to succeed. Ibrahim Traoré is not just launching a factory, he is continuing a legacy of African economic liberation. The battle for economic independence does not end with the opening of a single factory. There will be challenges. There will be pressure from foreign powers that do not want to see Burkina Faso succeed in this endeavor. But the foundation has been laid. The decision to establish M2S is proof that Burkina Faso is no longer willing to be a passive player in the global economy. It is willing to fight for its right to produce, to process, and to control its resources. And in doing so, it is challenging a system that has kept Africa in economic chains for far too long. Now the question is, how will Burkina Faso's decision impact Africa's industrialization journey? The process of industrialization is not just about building factories. It is about creating a system where local production thrives, where raw materials are processed into finished goods within national borders instead of being shipped abroad for minimal returns. Africa's economic problem has never been a lack of resources. It has been a lack of infrastructure and strategic policies to process those resources. Burkina Faso, under Captain Ibrahim Traoré, has chosen to break away from this pattern. Instead of exporting raw wheat and then paying to import processed flour at a much higher cost, the country is ensuring that every step of the value chain happens locally. This shift does more than just keep money within the economy. It fosters skills development, builds technological capacity, and ensures that Burkina Faso can produce its food without relying on foreign suppliers. Industrialization is not just an economic necessity, it is a matter of national security. Any country that depends on imports for essential goods is at the mercy of those controlling the supply. If a crisis occurs, whether political, economic, or environmental, import-dependent nations find themselves vulnerable to shortages and price manipulation. By producing flour locally, Burkina Faso is insulating itself from these risks and ensuring that its people have access to affordable, domestically produced food. The logic behind this move is clear. Control over production equals control over economic destiny. Many African nations have struggled with this realization, often because of pressure from international financial institutions that have promoted open market policies that benefit foreign producers more than local industries. For decades, African governments have been encouraged to prioritize trade over self-sufficiency, leading to economies that are heavily reliant on imports, while their industrial potential remains untapped. Traoré's approach disrupts this narrative. He is proving that African nations do not need to accept the status quo, and that they can choose to develop their industries instead of continuously supporting foreign economies. This model, if followed by other African nations, could spark an industrial revolution across the continent. The economic success of any country is determined not by what it consumes, but by what it produces. Countries that export raw materials and import finished goods remain in a cycle of economic stagnation, while those that develop industries based on local resources build wealth, employment, and long-term stability. Burkina Faso's flour factory may be just one step, but it represents a shift in thinking, one that prioritizes production over dependency, investment over short-term convenience, and long-term economic planning over external reliance. What makes this shift particularly significant is that it is happening in real time, without waiting for external approval or funding. In the past, African governments were often told that industrialization required years of planning, massive foreign investments, and the involvement of international corporations. But Traoré's approach is different. He is showing that a country does not need to wait for external validation to take control of its industries. Burkina Faso did not need an IMF-backed program or a World Bank-funded initiative to start producing its flour. It simply needed leadership that understood the importance of local production and the courage to act on it. This approach also challenges the idea that industrialization in Africa must follow the same blueprint as Western economies. The West industrialized over centuries, through colonization, resource extraction, and labor exploitation. Africa does not need to replicate that model. Instead, it can build industries based on its own needs, resources, and economic realities. Burkina Faso's flour factory is an example of an industrial project that is built for the people, by the people, designed to serve a domestic need rather than function as an export-driven facility meant to cater to foreign markets. Industrialization is not just about building factories, it is about creating entire ecosystems that support production, distribution, and consumption. The success of the M2S factory will depend not just on its ability to produce flour, but also on its integration into the broader economy. The government must ensure that bakeries, retailers, and food manufacturers prioritize local flour over imported alternatives. This requires a combination of policy support, incentives for local businesses, and public awareness campaigns that encourage consumers to embrace locally produced goods. What Burkina Faso is doing is not just about flour, it is about setting a precedent. If a landlocked country with limited financial resources can take this step, why can't wealthier African nations do the same? The truth is, they can, but they must be willing to challenge the systems that have kept them dependent for so long. They must be willing to invest in their industries even when it is easier to rely on imports. They must recognize that true economic freedom comes from the ability to produce, not just consume. The Traoré model is simple. If you have raw materials, process them. If you need a product, manufacture it. If you want independence, build it. It is a model that does not wait for external approval and does not rely on foreign aid or multinational corporations to take the first step. It is a model that prioritizes African production for African needs, ensuring that resources remain within the continent rather than flowing out to foreign economies. Burkina Faso's flower factory is not the end of this journey. It is the beginning. Industrialization is a process that requires continuous investment, policy support, and public participation. But the foundation has been laid. A country that once relied entirely on imported flour now can produce its own. If this success is expanded across other sectors, if Burkina Faso moves beyond flour to textiles, food processing, and other industries, the country could set an example that reshapes Africa's economic future. The only question now is, who will follow this model next? Do you think more nations need to stand on their own feet? Let us know in the comment section. Do you think the West will let Africa be self-dependent or somehow try to stop this? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.